Hello everyone and welcome! In today's video, I'm building my first micro RC rear-wheel drive drift car using a XRX DPA chassis from RC Supremacy and the sweet-looking Toyota Supra body from Kyosho. I'll be showcasing the entire build process from the unboxing to the first slides and sharing my experience with all of you. There's a lot to do and a lot to talk about, so let's dive right in. While I'm no stranger to smaller scale RC vehicles, most of the projects I've done and showcased on this channel so far are built with a greater focus on scale looks rather than performance. Some of these cars are also built using primarily custom handmade or 3D printed parts. While great projects that are always a lot of fun to drive and build, I'm very excited to dive into this build that instead focuses more on performance, though hopefully with this Supra body on top, it will be a looker as well. If you want to build a rear-wheel drive drift car, not just any chassis or electronics will do. Something like this XRX DPA chassis is what you'll need. It's a lower cost option and is well suited for those looking to get started with micro RC drifting, though it might not be the best introduction to the RC hobby in general. If you've never held a controller or turned any small screws before, this may not be the best introduction to the world of RC, but that of course is up to each individual to decide. Stay tuned to get a better idea of what's involved with putting one of these cars together. This chassis is available from RC Supremacy, which I'll link below in the description. It comes packed with almost every component you'll need to start drifting. One component, however, that is not included is the body. You'll find a variety of body options available for these chassis, including many plastic model car kits that can be modified to fit. Chassis plates can be ordered that will allow the wheelbase to be adjustable, so many 1/28 through 1/24 scale bodies will fit. But I instead chose a body with the same 94mm wheelbase that this chassis has in stock form. This Kyosho Mini Z Supra body will be a direct fit, as you'll see later on. RC Supremacy does offer the same body for sale as a kit, however for the sake of time, I went with this pre-painted and fully assembled model that you see here. Any 94mm wheelbase Mini Z body should fit the chassis with little to no work being needed. So what's the appeal of micro drift cars versus their larger 1/10 scale counterparts? Well, with a bit of experience driving both and seeing them side by side in action at this year's USTE, I was amazed by how similar these little cars perform to the larger ones. While I'm sure a more experienced hobbyist could identify many differences with how they drive, the little cars drift, at least visually, much like the larger scale ones. There's also no shortage of chassis, bodies, and hop-up parts to choose from. One of the biggest advantages of the micro cars is that little space is needed to set up a track. A big enough tabletop can be a perfectly suitable area to drift, unlike with a 1/10 scale car. One disadvantage though is that you'd better be good at working with tiny parts and even tinier hardware. Working on the micro scale cars can be a bit tricky to say the least. Oh, and if you think a smaller size means the price goes down proportionally, not quite. So with all that said, I'm excited to dive right in, so let's get this chassis unboxed and start putting it together. The chassis comes partially assembled, though some assembly work is still required. RC Supremacy sends out an email after purchase with a plethora of information, including assembly instructions, how to connect all your electronics, how to set up your ESC and gyro, what battery and pinion gears you can use, and other helpful resources like that. The instructions were very helpful. A little common sense and an eye for detail is required at times, and I think I may have spotted a typo at one point with regards to the length of a link. Not a big deal, it was something like it said 28mm when it very obviously should have been more like 18mm, but again, a little common sense goes a long way. Overall, very straightforward. Again, this kit might not be the best or certainly the easiest introduction to the RC hobby in general, but if you at least know somewhat what you're doing, you should have no issues putting this chassis together. Of course, I'm sure Brad, the owner of RC Supremacy, would be happy to answer any questions you might have along the way. If you haven't yet seen his YouTube content, certainly go check it out. I'll leave that link below in the description as well. Brad is a true hobbyist who builds these cars, drives them. You'll see him out at events. And again, go check out the RC Supremacy channel to see what he's got going on. I would highly recommend getting into contact with him should you have any questions. He certainly knows his stuff. So as you can see, the chassis is coming together. One of the things I noticed with this kit is the plastic parts are a bit harder than what I'm used to, so driving in some of those tiny little threaded shafts and certain hardware can be a little tricky. I did go ahead then and take the time to bore out some of those holes and really make sure everything was going together without issues and all the parts were aligned as well as I could make them. When building any RC chassis, it's a really good idea to take your time and really focus on the craftsmanship. It will lead to a better performing car in the end. Now, one thing that certainly didn't help with my build was I didn't actually have a proper 1mm hex driver, only a L-shaped Allen wrench, so that made things a little harder, but certainly still doable. I did go ahead and grease the ball joints with some grease that's not included with the chassis. I'm not sure how necessary it is to do so, but I really wanted to make sure that the steering components can move as smoothly and effortlessly as possible, which is quite important for a drift car. I did want to mention that I didn't see any hardware included with this kit that I could use to mount the motor to the chassis, which could have been an oversight on my part, but I have all different sizes of M2 hardware on hand, so I just used 2 of my own screws to secure the motor to the chassis, and I also provided my own wheel nuts to secure the wheels to the chassis as well. After several hours of work, here's a look at the completed chassis. Overall, a very impressive little platform that was a lot of fun to build. Once I had the chassis put together, I installed the remaining electronics. This was very straightforward and easy to do, thanks to the helpful information provided in that post-purchase email I mentioned earlier. So if you're wondering about the wiring, it's pretty simple and straightforward. The motor is soldered directly to the ESC and the battery plugs into the ESC right here. The ESC goes into channel 2 on the receiver. I'm using a little adapter here, which is actually not the correct size, but I just jammed it in there for now. I'll fix that later. And then the servo goes into channel 1 as is usual, and the gyro goes in between the servo and the receiver. I got everything connected and did a quick test to make sure all of the electronics were functioning correctly prior to mounting everything to the chassis. I programmed the endpoints on the gyro, which was very straightforward to do. I tried to use the channel 3 on my transmitter to control the gyro sensitivity, but I couldn't get that to work with the Radiolink receiver I'm using on this car, so to adjust the gyro, I simply have to do it manually with the little dial on top. With everything working, I mounted each component on the chassis using double-sided tape, doing my best to keep the weight over the center of the chassis. So now that the chassis is complete, I can turn my attention to this Kyosho body. This body is designed for Mini Z chassis, however it will fit this DPA chassis I have here as well. The cool thing about these Mini Z bodies is that they can be ordered pre-painted and pre-assembled, as this one is here, so they look fantastic right out of the box. Some people collect these bodies just to display them. As this body is designed for RC vehicles, it is made from plastic and is relatively lightweight. I removed the body from the display chassis, then secured this white piece that goes in the front to the RC chassis. With that piece in place, the body snaps right on just like it would on a Mini Z chassis. The final thing to add are the wheels and tires. Once again, these were sent to me by RC Supremacy, and I love the look of these wheels. The first tire was a little hard to slip on the wheel, so just like I would with 1/10 scale drift tires, I warmed them up with some hot water, and that made slipping them on much easier. I was excited to get these mounted and see how they look with the body. I provided my own silver M2 nylon lock nuts to secure the wheels to the chassis. They look awesome, but they're sticking out too far in the front. The front wheels are barely able to turn left and right before hitting the body. To correct this, I did two things. First, I adjusted the upper and lower control arms so they are as far in as possible. I also needed to adjust the tie rods to maintain a reasonable toe angle. Doing this helped a lot, but a little more work is still necessary. I had to very carefully remove some material from the front side of the wheel arch so the wheels can fully turn and not rub against the body. After carefully removing this material, the wheels can steer to full lock with virtually no risk of rubbing. A bit stressful to be modifying this beautiful body like that, but the work is complete and no harm was done to the exterior. And finally, at this point, the car is complete. What an awesome looking car. These wheels pair so well with that Supra body. I'd like to see if I can lower the ride height just a bit in the future, but other than that, as far as I'm concerned, the car is perfect. Of course, all that's left to do at this point was slide this car around for the first time. Ignoring my lack of skill, I was amazed how well the car can drift right out of the box. One thing I think I still need to address is the front wheels are steering like crazy, as you can see. Really putting that servo to the test. Reducing the gyro sensitivity helped, but it did not fully eliminate this behavior. I'm not sure if further adjustments are needed or if this rapid turning is caused by the rough surface I'm driving on. This concrete may look smooth, but when you consider the context of how tiny this car is relative to it, it's actually rather bumpy. But man, this car will still drift very controllably when I can actually get a hang of it. I've only driven this car for maybe like 15 minutes in total so far, so I've still got a lot to learn and experiment with, but I'm hooked. My intentions aren't necessarily to have this thing drifting like a pro, but rather just something to slide around the shop with for fun, and it looks like it will certainly fulfill that goal. What a cool little car. It looks good, it's fun to drive, I couldn't ask for more. I hope you enjoyed watching this build and found it informative. A huge thanks to RC Supremacy for sending this chassis. Again, the link is below in the description if you'd like to get your own. I'm looking forward to continuing to drive and tinker with this car a bit, especially as the weather starts getting cold, making outdoor RC driving a little less desirable. As always, thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.